Okay, the final session of the day is on the media in the 21st century. We have a very good panel. There's an error in the program. I'm not chairing this session. Maggie Brown is chairing it. She is a very respected media commentator and a former colleague on both Reuters and The Independent. And she will manage our three speakers, all of whom are online.
Thank you, Raymond. Yes, I am indeed Maggie Brown. One of my attributes is actually not as a media commentator. I'm also the historian of Channel 4, which I've spent rather too much of my life working on, but I am now the person who knows all about 40 years and is actually a pretty fierce opponent of it being sold off. Anyway, actually, I have renamed this session in my mind, which after two very interesting sessions this afternoon, I'm saying let's get back to journalism, which is what I think quite a lot of you are about. We have a fantastic panel here. Ray is being modest. When I was researching this, I just came up and up again against people who've been brave, they've been committed, they're highly experienced journalists who are at the top of their fields, and in different spheres, they are tackling really the big issues, standing for freedom of the media, freedom for expression, and telling truth to power. And the three panelists come, of course, from Asia, Africa, and now the United States. And they answer, really, I think, the central question we're asking: what are the prospects for journalism in this digital age? Opportunity, excitement, and clearly there's been risk. Zaffar Abbas, our first contributor, the editor of Dawn, one of the oldest newspapers in Pakistan, English language, founded in 1941, and he's been a journalist and editor there since 2010. He actually has spoken quite widely about his concerns as he navigates the political and military rule that Pakistan operates under. He says, "I have confronted violence and intimidation all through my working life, 40 years as a journalist, trying to tell the truth. Surrender is not journalism." When in a country like Pakistan, even discussing politics or serious conflict is a red flag. He won in 2019 the International Press Freedom Award and set up the Committee for the Protection of Journalists because he said at that point, I think he was talking about Pakistan, 60 had been killed. And in 1991, he was beaten so badly, he had to go to hospital. He has spent a lot of his time at Dawn resisting censorship, government pressure, military pressure, and even an interrogation with a reporter over an exclusive report which had annoyed the authorities, but which he did not reveal his sources to. And he has also found that military guards have disrupted the distribution of Dawn in order, I think, partly to attack its journalistic base, which is, of course, partly based on advertising. We kept reminding the government and security services harbouring Islamic group militants was a bad idea and would bring us grief, he says. So I'll just go through the other two so that we are aware of where they're all coming from. Our second panelist, a woman, Natalia Antelava, is the co-founder of something which maybe people here in this room have already accessed, CODA story. And if you haven't, do, because it's brilliant. She has set up, with a co-founder, a not-for-profit, New York-based reporting body with a relentless, singular focus to dig deep into the roots of crises. And she has named the areas that she's most concerned about: authoritarian tech, the war on science, sort of denial of COVID, etc., and misinformation, which, as we know, is rampant. And she is eager, and I find this really, really useful, to place current flashpoints in an historical context. obviously I'm a historian, so I believe in historical context, but as she has been very, very active in the whole Ukraine area, partly because she is Georgian by background, she has been responsible for the rolling out of this extremely valuable platform. And our third, and by no means last, panellist is Violet Gonda, who was born in Zimbabwe, trained as a journalist in Zimbabwe, but was exiled really for 20 years under Robert Mugabe. She has got a master's in international journalism from the City University here, and she has spread her wings enormously. Although she's unfortunately found herself with the new president back in the same place. I don't know if she's got a passport now, but she was certainly denied it. At the moment, she's working for Reuters, but in the course of her career, she has set up various initiatives, including a radio station, which lasted till 2014, which was broadcasting information, truthful information, to a heavily censored nation in Zimbabwe. And she is expert really now in both presenting and doing interviews with very distinguished people, but also her most recent work, which I have been looking at and enjoying, is video shorts in which she actually lets the people of Zimbabwe talk about their lives. They're very, very informative and very nicely done. And I think this is her way of adapting to her skills, really, to a new environment, internet and online journalism, but in very snappy, and on YouTube as well. So anyway, can we please have our first panelist, I'm getting away with myself, Zaffar Abbas, please. Hello, Zaffar.
Hi, thanks a lot. I don't know where to start with the challenges in the 21st century. I can speak about myself. I did something very weird for most journalists in Pakistan, that at the turn of the century, I returned to what is known as the legacy media, to a newspaper, after working for 16, 17 years with the BBC doing radio and television journalism. And people used to ask me, what the hell have you done? I mean, newspapers are dying. Why are you going back to a newspaper? There were two reasons. One was it was my first love. I started as a newspaper journalist. And secondly, I was offered this job to take over as the editor of Dawn, which is arguably the most authentic and credible newspaper in Pakistan. So I did that, and immediately I was confronted with all kinds of challenges, the challenges of the 21st century, like is the newspaper going to survive? Are the newspapers in Pakistan going to survive, as they were dying in many other countries and people were switching to various other modes of information? So that was one challenge. And from my experience, from the excellent team that I had, we built on doing exclusive stories, investigative journalism, to keep this newspaper as the talking point in the world of journalism, as well as among the political class. And we did some good stories, some controversial stories. We raised issues that were not liked by Pakistan's powerful military, the strong political class. They came after us, but that was all part of the game, and we continued to fight back, and we are fighting till this day. But that was one part of it, doing credible journalism to make or keep ourselves relevant. The other challenges were found in the newsroom. For instance, I was handling the old hacks, the people who had worked in the newspaper for many, many years, and they had a very old style of doing journalism. I had to bring in a new, younger lot, which came with new ideas. They used to talk about what was happening on the social media, what was happening on the internet, and all those things. And till this day, my struggle is to create a combination of young journalists who are tech savvy, but at the same time to keep the old guards there, who are experienced people who can rarely go wrong with facts. And if I am able to create that kind of combination, probably it will keep this newspaper going for a long time. But it's easier said than done. The new challenges bring in so many other problems, for instance, online harassment, the way campaigns and organized campaigns have been launched against our journalists, our journalism on the social media, mainly by trolls that are sponsored by various sections of the authorities, and this continues till this day. So these are huge challenges that we are faced with. People still say that the newspapers are dying if they are not already dead, but I say that if we continue to do good journalism, we continue to build a whole mechanism of fact-checking, we can counter all these things, the so-called fake media thing, which has replaced what we were taught about disinformation and misinformation. So checking facts, countering fake news, overcoming these problems remains a major challenge. But Pakistan is one of those countries where there's a history of attaining the kind of freedom we have at the moment. In this country, yes, newspapers have survived. Hardly one or two newspapers have been put to bed in a way that they have died. Other newspapers are still there. It's a huge struggle. The advertising has almost gone away. Most people have moved to television. We have got something like 30, 35, 24/7 news channels in the country, which is an amazing thing. But people say in a semi-literate society, television works more effectively than newspapers or even the internet. And this is exactly what is happening in countries like Pakistan and India, and to a certain extent also in Bangladesh. So those problems remain there. But even today, I say why the legacy media is important is because we give enough time for fact-checking. We come up with exclusive stories. We give reporters time to investigate stories. And then those stories are highlighted on our website. They are picked up by others. And our discussion continues. But at the bottom of the whole thing is a very credible newspaper which tries not to go wrong. And if we make mistakes, we have a whole mechanism where we admit mistakes and we acknowledge, at times we even apologize for those mistakes, which is part of journalism and which should be the case. So yes, new challenges are there. Probably tomorrow, this younger lot with new ideas is going to take over. But I am from the old school. I love old style of journalism, and I will continue to make sure that this newspaper survives for as long as it can.
Thank you very much. Can I pose one question for answering later on? I got the impression, though, looking at your websites and your columnists and features, and as well as news, that you may well have brought in, despite the appeal and lure of television, a younger demographic to your readership base. Is that just me misreading the signs? I thought you had a slot for younger journalists to contribute to the paper.
Oh, no, we certainly have. There's a combination of the all very seasoned writers contributing to our editorials remain guarded by all the experienced people who do it. But our website has done wonderfully well. They have started presenting these editorials and these columns and writers, even written by more seasoned and experienced people, in a way that it attracts much younger audience towards these editorials, the serious issues that the country is confronted with. And our audiences have continued to grow with lots and lots of younger people really getting involved in discussions about serious matters.
Well, thank you very much. And when we come back for a more general discussion, I would also like you to maybe explain whether the element of persecution that you do experience in Pakistan, whether that has moderated or if it remains as fierce and and off-putting as it has been for most of your career. I think we must now move on to our second panelist, Natalia, if she's there.
I'm here, yeah.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
I've been so distracted
Yeah.
by your. I've been so distracted by your wonderful site. There's so many incredible stories on it. So please tell us how it's all
Thank
going.
you so much. That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear.
Brilliant.
I actually managed. Thank you. I managed to surprisingly get on the Zoom link early and Zoom bomb the previous session on education. And one of the panelists was talking about the crisis of imagination in higher education. And you know, I think journalism in part experienced this the same. Although at the same time, I think, as horrible as the world often seems at the moment, and the challenges are endless for journalism, from business models, and it especially affects, I think, the mainstream media and kind of the legacy publications, to prosecution. I mean, no one knows better than Zaffar, or, you know, just yesterday we heard that CODA's partners in the Philippines, Rappler, that was founded by the incredible Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize this year, they've been ordered to shut down. So there is a lot of grim news around, but I think there's also been, I've been really encouraged by a lot of imagination that many journalists have put into you know, reinventing the models that we use to produce good journalism. And I want to emphasize that in reimagining, I think an important thing is to innovate without breaking what's actually working. And one thing that is working is that the journalism itself, I don't think it really needs to be reinvented. But I think what needs to be, you know, thought through and maybe rethought is how we get the information, the stories to our audiences. How do we compete in this deafening noise that has been created by complete overload of information? Because, you know, everyone has a platform today. So how do journalists become voices that are able to cut through? You know, to me, the noise created by the digital age is the new censorship in many ways. It distracts from truth. So we need to be trying extra hard to make sure that stories we tell captivate and get the attention. And I think that is the biggest challenge. But I think, you know, I absolutely complete, you know, evangelist when it comes to, you know, the old-fashioned journalism that Zaffar was talking about. And I think there are just ways of presenting it and putting it out, you know, online. And that's in many ways what we're trying to do at CODA. You know, CODA website looks like, you know, many other websites. In some ways it's not, and we're a digital-only publication. We are sort of do multi-format stuff, and we call ourselves format agnostic, which is a nice fancy word, but it basically means that, you know, we do video and we do multimedia stories, but we do a lot of text stories, and the bread and butter is definitely text. And but what we do differently from legacy media is that we have laser focus on certain themes. So we pick this overarching crises, these overarching themes, and we look at such as disinformation or war on science or use of technology to promote authoritarian agendas. And we try to find the themes that run through this overarching crises, whether it's, you know, the manipulation of history and disinformation, or the use of soft power, and so on. So we have a very thematic lenses, which allows us as journalists to really focus on trends and patterns, and instead of kind of chasing the news cycle and reporting on the latest. And the idea very much came from my co-founders' experiences in the mainstream and legacy media. And by no means, I was with the BBC for many, many years as a reporter in, you know, living and working in different parts of the world. And at some point, you know, I was both as a consumer of news And as someone who was, part of the industry, I was frustrated by the fact that we were too fast to move on. We were too, we didn't pay enough attention to stories once they slipped away from the headlines and journalists left, but stories don't end when journalists leave. So the challenge that we tried to address was, how do you actually, create, how do you sustain attention, and how do you stay on the story, and keep your audiences on the story with you? And the solution that we came up with, and I'm sure there are many others, was to focus on the thematic rather than chronological, to look at these themes and dig deep into them, into these crises. But I think what's really important to emphasize is that CODA is part of a really big and in many ways revolutionary wave of nonprofit journalism that largely started actually in the United States. This whole, kind of new cohort of news organizations that came in to replace local newspapers that went out of business because the advertising model for journalism is broken. And nonprofit journalism, when done in a way with this like smaller voices, I think is in many ways is better fit for modern age than, the big like single agenda, massive public broadcasters or organizations. It's more nimble, it finds its niches. But what's key to both its existence and its survival, I think, is collaboration. And it's also something that I absolutely love and that makes me really optimistic about the future of journalism, is the fact that, the thinking of, younger reporters who come in and work for us, or my peers at other nonprofit news organizations in the US or in Europe or, around the world, the spirit of collaboration is really, really strong. We share stories, we don't compete with each other, we team up a lot more. I don't really see any other future for journalism outside of these collaborations, and because I unless you are kind of a massive giant like CNN, it's very hard. The exclusives, I think, will increasingly start being the bread and butter of journalism.
Can I ask you, Natalia, can I ask you something? Are you paying the journalists properly? I mean, you managed to draw together people from a range of countries, but that was the thing that was worrying me when I was been watching your output a great deal. And I note, by the way, too, that you do quite a variety of treatments. It can be words, video, visuals, even almost recreating situations. But where does your funding actually come from? And do you sell stories? Is that how you also manage to keep going?
The funding mostly comes from institutional funders, but we've worked really hard to diversify.
Who are traditional funders?
The institutional funders are big foundations that traditionally give to journalists. So, the Reeve and David Logan Foundation in the United States. We have just applied for a grant with the MacArthur Foundation. So it's grants based. Most of them are all of them are on our website. But what's really important, I think, for all small newsrooms like ours, is to make sure that your funding is diverse and you're not relying on a single donor, or you're not relying on, on a single institution that funds you. So we also repackage our journalism for streaming platforms. We partner up with bigger mainstream organizations that fund some of we work on big editorial collaborations. We have a membership program, so some of the stories are funded by members who contribute to CODA Story, and who are sort of among our sort of favorite donors because they are the consumers. But we don't have a paywall, we don't have subscriptions, and yes, we are the whole idea of a nonprofit is that you basically depend on both the charitable on kind of foundation funding. In this case, it's a mix, so we try to mix it up as much as possible to make sure that we do pay our journalists decently. Yes, we do. We pay for freelancers. We pay very competitive rates.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to that question because I think that we're in a room now with a lot of people looking for jobs. So the question is really, how good an offer can you make? Anyway, let's move on to our third contributor to this discussion, Violet Gonda, who I think is waiting for us in London, and she is working both on her own projects and I think very, very busy working for Reuters. Hello, Violet.
Hi, Maggie, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this important conference, and I'm honored to share ideas with my esteemed colleagues on this panel. I've, maybe I should talk about a bit of my background in terms of dealing with this question that we have to discuss today. I've had a rather unusual start as a journalist, as I did not work for the mainstream media, and certainly 25 years ago, there was no social media to talk about. Because of media restrictions in my country, Zimbabwe, I have had to find alternative ways to report freely on the political and human rights issues. And this was together with a small team of broadcasters. I've been fortunate to work for mainstream organizations as well as more innovative, or in some eyes, illegal operations in order to try and get news to the audience. For example, like from setting up satellite radio and television stations, broadcasting on shortwave from the UK, America, and South Africa. And President Robert Mugabe's government would call them pirate stations. And also we used to embark on text message campaigns, sending news headlines to Zimbabweans by phone when shortwave signals were blocked by the regime in Zimbabwe, and also setting up online platforms to live stream. So it's like spending the last 20 years finding alternative ways to circumvent censorship. And I started my journalism career in Zimbabwe, then moved to the UK to be able to continue to be to broadcast back into Zimbabwe, and was then prohibited from returning to my country. So I ended up staying here and broadcasting for more than 20 years. But I returned to Zimbabwe in 2018 as a freelance journalist, and I was armed with just my cell phone and no news organization backing me. This was to cover the elections after President Mugabe was removed in a coup. It was a different and a difficult country I returned to. This is like almost 20 years after, returning to Zimbabwe. And I quickly had to look for organizations to align with, not only as a form of protection, but also it was difficult to get funding as an independent journalist. I was able to work with a number of human rights organizations, and it's like what Natalia was talking about, collaboration. This is what I had to do. And these organizations, because I tried to apply for funding and I couldn't get money to do any of the programs that I wanted to do in Zimbabwe. So the human rights organizations became my fiscal agents, and I was able to host town hall style presidential and parliamentary election debates with the candidates in Zimbabwe. And with a small team, we also produced an investigative documentary on the killings of innocent civilians on the streets of Harare by soldiers. This was just after the controversial 2018 elections, and we had to use social media platforms to distribute these programs. After my year-long stint, I moved back to the UK as it was no longer viable or safe to stay in Zimbabwe, as I'd become the face of my news team. It's very difficult. The kind of journalism that I do is it's not anything special. It's the kind of journalism that everyone else does. But I forgot that, I was used to this kind of journalism when I was reporting from outside Zimbabwe for many years. But when I was in Zimbabwe, I was challenging the army generals at press conferences, the president, and, all these other politicians. And these are some of the things they were not used to. And I was quickly labeled a rebel, and, the trolls came after me online and other platforms. So it was back to the drawing board in the UK. And in the last couple of years, I reconvened with the team who are actually working discreetly in Zimbabwe. And we have started producing these mini investigative documentaries that Maggie has been talking about, where we are dissecting complex issues in the country and we are simplifying them. And then we then share these productions of between 2 to 10 minutes each on social media platforms, especially on WhatsApp groups, as many Zimbabweans use WhatsApp. So, and sometimes we even sort of like identify people who have various WhatsApp groups. You can, if you know, there are about 225 people that can be in a WhatsApp groups, and there's some people in Zimbabwe who have set up multiple WhatsApp groups of these. So if we just distribute those documentaries, these mini features to all these people, still share them, and then they multiply. And then also, I'm used like Zaffar to the traditional kind of reporting, and main social media is sort of like new to me in the sense of distributing my materials. So I've been posting also on YouTube and Twitter, and we have a Facebook page, but it's slow in terms of getting people to warm up to those to those platforms. But our main platform that we distribute to is WhatsApp. And these are just a few examples of how I've managed to work as a journalist in an environment where the press is not free.
Could we also just have a word? No, it's very interesting, and I have been watching them, and I also really liked your analysis of I think there were some by-elections that have recently taken place, and you were counting how many men had been returned and how many women. I think it was 118 candidates who were male and 18 women. So this, which leads me to I just wanted to bring this in since this is a Commonwealth debate. You're the president of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television. And obviously that's an NGO, but it has consultative status links to the United Nations. And I think since you got that job, you have had to relaunch it. So I would just like to know what exactly you're doing in the chapters that obviously seem to cover a lot of the countries that are in the Commonwealth. And I think you also have some training programs as well, perhaps. And I mean, I'm talking really from a bit of a level of ignorance. So I think it would be good to know.
Yeah, definitely. I'm the president of the oldest global media organization for female broadcasters. It's called the International Association of Women in Radio and TV, or IOWAT. And we conduct various projects for female broadcasters, from safety training for journalists at risk, gender mainstreaming projects, curating film festivals, producing long documentaries, and all these documentaries are films made by women and about women. They can be on health, women and health, women and climate change, and also with award-winning documentaries on female correspondents, covering war zones, and we've been, distributing this all over the world. And currently, we are actually setting up a digital safe house project for journalists under attack. And the pilot project, which was funded by the International Media Support, or IMS, started in the Philippines last year. And because we also have chapters in Afghanistan and Moldova, where we've had serious problems with our journalists, we also are in the process of submitting proposals to set up digital safe houses in Afghanistan, Moldova, and also we are working with colleagues in Ukraine. These are important platforms to help secure safe places for our colleagues who are under attack for doing their work. And also we train women right now on. We are doing a topic on climate change, and we're doing these virtual workshops where we are training our female journalists who are, especially in the global south, how they can use their mobile phones to cover climate change issues. And then we train them how to edit, how to write the scripts. And we're hoping that after this whole process of the training, we will then screen a full documentary based from, taking the snippets from the different countries where there's Kenya, China, Cameroon, all over the world. And then we are going to screen those at our biennial conference in November this year. And we're also working with UNESCO to try and see if we can take this campaign to the climate change global conference in Egypt at the end of the year also. So, and there are various other projects that we're doing, but the biggest challenge we have is funding. But that's a story for another day.
Well, I think that's the universal theme, really. And maybe now we can throw the discussion open first, I think, just to the panelists, and then I think we've got some quite interested student editors here. I wanted to ask this question, really: what is the most effective way around censorship? And is the danger that we're seeing almost repeatedly year after year to journalists in any way going to be tackled soon? There seems to be, certainly when one thinks of Ukraine, and certainly in the early stages, there seems very little respect for the processes of independent journalism. I think, Zaffar, you might well be the person to start this one off.
No, it's a tough task to go around censorship in many countries. It varies from country to country, as you will agree. What is happening at the moment is that various methods are being used to curb the media because we have a functioning parliament and democracy, and so it's difficult for the government of the day or other state institutions like the military or intelligence services to directly impose censorship on the media. But they use various other tools to do it, to pressurize the media by blocking their circulation, by pulling the plug on various news channels, by pressurizing individual journalists against doing something or forcing them to propagate their version of the news. So all these things continue. The whole thing is, if the news organizations are powerful, if they've got powerful leadership, even in a private organization, if the owners rely on the editors to really go after credible journalism and fight back whenever there is pressure, I think we can still survive. There are so many cases around the world where powerful editors with a good team of journalists have continued to fight back despite all these pressures, and they have survived. Yet, of course, if the powerful really want to come after us, they can shut down the newspaper, they can shut down a television station. But if we are working in a situation where even there is a semblance of democracy over there, the direct threat of censorship becomes very difficult unless you have an authoritarian rule where there is no question of freedom of the media. Same is the case in Pakistan, for instance. What has been happening over a period of time that we have gone through various phases. There used to be complete censorship in the country. We had journalists' union who continued to fight back. There were periods where dozens and dozens of journalists went to jail just talking about media freedom against the repressive laws. And we earned a kind of press freedom. Then came a second period where indirect methods were used. Today, what is happening in countries like Pakistan, and it's not just Pakistan, many other countries, like take Erdogan's Turkey or Narendra Modi's India or Sheikh Hasina Wajid's Bangladesh, and of course Pakistan, where these institutions like the military or the authoritarian rulers or people who are aspiring to be authoritarian, they want to push what, for want of better word, can be described as a single narrative of ultra-nationalism. So unless you follow their position, you are branded as unpatriotic or anti-state. And this we have seen in India, in Pakistan, in Turkey, Bangladesh, and so many other countries, that this whole idea of whether you're talking about the military institution, the defense budget, you're talking about the foreign policy, you're talking about other critical issues in the country, if you try to move away from the state policy or question that policy, you will be branded unpatriotic. There are journalists who cave in and start to follow the state's line, but there are still many journalists who continue to challenge the state narrative. And that is how this fight continues to go on.
Thank you. Natalia?
Agree.
Your
I
micro-
think oh,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
oh, sorry. 3 years of the pandemic and I still haven't learned. And they, I agree with all of the above, but I think, you know, I do think that we often also underestimate the authoritarians, and we underestimate how well they collaborate. You know, I mentioned collaboration between journalists earlier, but it's incredible how well the network of authoritarian regimes globally has worked. One of the you know, without going to kind of straightforward censorship, I think Russia is a fascinating case study of a lot of sort of experiments with both disinformation and sort of modern day censorship, which is so different from, you know, the old day censorship. And a lot of the tricks tested in Russia have we've seen them since used in many different places, including the ones that Zaffar mentioned, you know, from India to Brazil. But one of the things that Vladimir Putin's government has done very successfully to intimidate and silence journalists and to build a wall between them and their audiences is what's called in Russia the foreign agents law, so calling journalists foreign agents. And incredibly, after it was adopted in Russia, and the people, you know, people who are then declared, people and organizations can be declared foreign agents. They, once they are, it creates, you know, insane sort of bureaucratic hurdles in their lives, and they have to report every cent they spent, and there are all sorts that makes their life pretty unbearable. But with the publications, they also have, before they publish anything, whether it's on social media or whether it's, you know, in the paper at home, no longer happening in Russia, they have to announce, they say, you know, I am a foreign agent, and then first comes that in caps and then the message. Yeah. And the foreign agents legislation has been picked up around the world by many governments. You know, it's been adopted in Nicaragua.
I think we need
to
I agree with you. Can we just bring in our final panelist? I'm going mad now. Can we have Violet back, because I think that she has a point to make on that too. And then we must allow for some questions. Violet, are you there? Just quickly.
You know, yes, I agree with what both my colleagues have said. And I think we see these challenges all over the world where corrupt regimes are using legislation to mute democratic voices. And sadly, the casualty of all this, you know, is the truth. I was talking about how I, for example, had to leave the country because I couldn't really report on the way I wanted to report. And in a way, I use self-censorship. You know, I wasn't directly told that you don't do this, but you can tell how the system operates and how you're treated, even, you know, in on social media, that if you continue exposing what's happening, especially in the country, there are consequences. We've seen journalists in a country like Zimbabwe getting arrested, you know, for just doing their job. Yeah. And the last point on that I also wanted to make on this, even in Zimbabwe, an issue with just, with smartphones, Zimbabweans carry on their person, not only a news source, but also it's potentially incriminating evidence of an insult to the president that, you know, having a phone can be a threat to national security just by receiving messages or jokes on WhatsApp groups, because you can get in trouble with this. And these are the kind of legislation that they are putting in place, you know, to muzzle people, to silence people, and a lot of people won't be able to access information freely.
Right, now let's have some questions. Anybody like to put their hands up? Ray.
Well, I think I'm asking this on behalf of all the young people in the room who would like to ask the panelists from their experience, how do you get a job in journalism?
The big question. Anybody else want to comment on that? Yes?
It's a different question. Can I go ahead?
Oh, it's a different question. Well, let's have that question so we can all think about it. What's your question, since you've got the mic?
My question is very specific to Zaffar Abbas. I just wondered if he can just talk about, because he's such a kind of advocate of traditional media and print media, would he like to throw some light on the vloggers, which are actually getting a lot of attention in the Pakistani media space? This is especially with the recent political crisis, and also talk a bit more about the twittering politicians, and it's a very specific question. Thank you.
Okay, let's have the journalists first. Can anybody help with jobs? A deafening silence.
I mean, I can. If there are no takers, I can. Not that I have straightforward answers, but I'm sure there are different ways of doing that. But there are a lot of. I mean, the good thing, I think, especially all of you are in the UK. So, and I think there are a lot of opportunities. I know things aren't exactly looking very. You know, I understand things may seem somewhat grim, but I think it's really worth looking at all the, beyond the legacy media and the organizations like Bureau for Investigative Reporting, like Open Democracy. There are lots of organizations, lot fewer than in some of the other places, but still many really interesting new organizations that are run by people who come out of legacy publications and have work with the same principles and are practicing the old-fashioned journalism in slightly newer formats. So look at that. I mean, I think internships is a really thorny subject. Personally, we don't offer unpaid internships at all, so our internships are very competitive. So unless they're for academic credit or for, it's either money or academic credit. And I think, it's a major driver of inequality in journalism when people who can afford to take unpaid internships and work experiences take them. But I mean, we're currently hiring, although I think the applications closed today, but we're hiring for 2 reporter positions. But I think there are it's not easy, but if you're dedicated, I think there is a great generation of new journalists coming up, really talented reporters, you got to be dedicated and
thank you.
Prepared,
That's
prepared
fantastic optimism. Thank you so much. I mean, this is Natalia. Thank you.
Add pessimist and prepared for a life of poverty, obviously, because it never pays.
Well, maybe you're going to be challenged by a small bodies of journalists getting together and replicating what you've done as a sort of new school or new wave of journalism. I think, unfortunately, can I ask that for the last question? Have we got time? 1 minute. No, I'm afraid we're going to have to say a very big thank you to our 3 panelists. You've all been wonderful. And I think we could have had another a session talking about some of the other related subjects. So thank you, Zaffar, thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Violet.
Thank you.
It's been a very nice session.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.